The crunch of gravel beneath my tires felt different today. Something was off. My silver SUV rounded the last bend of Maple Ridge Road, revealing my family's farm. Except it wasn't my farm anymore. A massive concrete monster rose from what used to be our golden wheat fields, its windows gleaming like 1,000 watchful eyes. I pulled over, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The farm I'd known my entire life had vanished. Where wheat once swayed, now stood a 3-story hotel with pristine landscaping, manicured lawns, and a huge parking lot. Bright yellow construction barriers surrounded the property, and workers in hard hats moved about like busy ants. My mind raced. How could this happen? I'd only been gone for a month, a critical consulting job in Singapore that my family desperately needed. Sarah and I had discussed every detail before I left. We'd secured everything, or so we thought. The farm had been in my family for 4 generations, each acre sacred and carefully maintained. A construction worker noticed me and approached. "Can I help you?" he asked, his clipboard tucked under his arm. I stepped out of the car, my legs feeling like rubber. "This is my family's land," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm Richard Holloway." The worker shifted uncomfortably. "Oh, you're the owner?" he said, seeming unsure how to proceed. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Richard, emergency. Call me ASAP." But my eyes were fixed on the hotel rising from my farmland like an alien structure. I walked closer, my boots crunching on what used to be fertile soil. Each step felt like a violation. The hotel wasn't just a building. It was a statement, a massive concrete declaration that someone believed they could simply take what wasn't theirs. Near the construction entrance, a large sign caught my attention. Willowbrook Community Development. Approved by HOA board, Karen Reynolds's name was prominently displayed as the project director. My mind began connecting dots. Karen, the HOA president, who'd always viewed our farm as an inconvenience. The woman who'd complained about our unkempt boundaries, who'd sent endless letters about grass height and fence regulations. She'd always wanted our land, but this was beyond anything I'd imagined. A stack of papers lay on a nearby table. Curiosity pulled me closer. Construction permits, zoning documents, approval stamps. Each page told a piece of a story I was desperate to understand. One document particularly caught my eye, a small notation about community improvement zones. It seemed suspicious. Something about the language felt off. Not illegal, perhaps, but definitely calculated. The construction worker watched me nervously. "Sir, you can't be here," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I turned, offering a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I'll be leaving soon," driving back into town. My mind whirled with questions. How long had this been planned? What legal maneuvers had Karen used? And most importantly, how could I prove this was wrong? Sarah's text message remained unanswered. I needed to gather information to understand exactly what had happened while I was gone. This wasn't just about a piece of land. This was about justice, about preserving a legacy. A billboard caught my eye as I drove. Willowbrook, growing together. The irony wasn't lost on me. Growing together apparently meant taking without asking. At a local coffee shop, I started making notes. Dates, observations, questions. Each scribbled line was a step toward understanding the complex puzzle before me. The farm wasn't just land, it was our history, our future. The waitress refilled my coffee. "Rough day?" she asked. I looked up, a determined smile forming. "Just getting started," I replied. Little did Karen know, I was about to fight back, and I would fight smart. The dusty file cabinet in my barn held more secrets than I'd ever imagined. Sunlight filtered through the wooden slats, catching specks of dust as I carefully pulled out a stack of yellowed documents. My grandfather had meticulously preserved them. My fingers traced the edges of old property maps, each crease telling a story of our family's connection to this land. I spread the documents across the workbench, sorting through decades of paperwork. Most people would have thrown these away years ago, but something always told me to keep them. My grandfather was a careful man, always preparing for the unexpected. Now those preparations might be my only hope. The first document was a hand-drawn property map from 1952, intricate pencil lines marking the exact boundaries of our farm, with notes scribbled in the margins. I remembered my grandfather telling me stories about how he fought to keep this land during tough times. "Knowledge is your best weapon," he'd always say, his weathered hands pointing to these very documents. As I examined the papers, a pattern began to emerge. The Homeowners Association hadn't just appeared out of nowhere. They'd been slowly chipping away at individual property rights for years. I found old meeting minutes, correspondence, and legal notices that painted a clearer picture of Karen Reynolds and her long-standing ambitions. A faded yellow envelope caught my eye. Inside, a series of letters detailed a property dispute from decades ago. The HOA had tried the same tactic before, claiming abandoned or underused land for community development, but someone had stopped them then, and those documents showed exactly how. I pulled out my phone and began taking careful photographs of each document. My hands were steady, but my mind raced. Each page was a potential piece of the puzzle. Sarah would help me organize these later. She had a knack for seeing connections I might miss. The barn suddenly felt different. These weren't just old papers anymore. They were evidence, weapons in a fight I hadn't asked for, but was now determined to win. A noise outside made me pause. The crunch of gravel told me someone was approaching. I quickly gathered the documents, my heart racing. Through the barn's small window, I saw a white SUV with HOA parking stickers pulling up to the property line. Karen Reynolds stepped out, her designer sunglasses reflecting the midday sun. She walked with the confidence of someone who believed she owned everything she saw. I watched silently, knowing she couldn't see me in the shadowy interior of the barn. She pulled out a clipboard, making notes and looking around like she was taking inventory of my land. Her expensive heels sank slightly into the soft ground where my wheat had grown just weeks ago. I could see the hotel construction in the background, a monstrous concrete structure that looked completely out of place in this rural landscape. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, my lawyer. "Found something interesting. Call me ASAP." I knew I had to be careful. One wrong move could give Karen exactly what she wanted. A reason to claim I was an unreasonable property owner. I'd learned from my grandfather that patience was a strategy, not a weakness. The research I'd done over the past few days had revealed more than just property lines. I'd uncovered a web of connections between the HOA, local developers, and city council members. Each connection was another thread in a complicated tapestry of local politics and land development. Karen finished her inspection and drove away, leaving nothing but dust and uncertainty in her wake. I waited a few minutes, then stepped out of the barn. The land felt different now. No longer just a peaceful farm, but a battlefield. My next move had to be calculated. I needed to gather more information, build a stronger case. The documents in my hand were just the beginning. Somewhere in these papers was the key to stopping Karen and the HOA's land grab. I looked at the hotel rising in the distance. They thought they'd won, but they had no idea what was coming. The community center felt like a battlefield as I walked through its double doors. Stacks of carefully organized documents filling my leather briefcase. Each page was a weapon in the fight for my family's land. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the room packed with HOA board members and curious community residents. Karen Reynolds sat at the head of the long wooden table, her perfectly pressed blazer and carefully styled hair screaming of calculated control. She'd always been the type who believed rules were something she could bend, not follow. I remembered how she'd cornered neighbors at previous meetings, her voice dripping with false sweetness that barely masked her true intentions. "I'd like to discuss the recent development on my family's farmland," I began, my voice calm and steady. The room fell silent. Whispers died instantly, replaced by an electric tension you could almost touch. I spread out the first set of documents, old property maps dating back to my grandfather's time, each one meticulously preserved and notarized. The maps showed clear boundary lines, easements, and historical land use agreements that predated the HOA's existence by decades. My fingers traced the faded lines, each one a story of family history and legal protection. Karen's eyebrow twitched just a millimeter, but I caught it. That tiny movement told me everything. She knew she was sitting on shaky ground. These documents, I continued, prove that the land where the hotel now stands was never legally transferable without my explicit consent. I pulled out a series of photographs, shots of the farm from different years, showing continuous maintenance, crop rotations, and family involvement. Each image was time-stamped, each one a nail in the HOA's coffin. A middle-aged woman in the back row leaned forward. I recognized her as Martha Thompson, a longtime resident who'd always been fair-minded. Her eyes scanned the documents, her expression changing from curiosity to genuine concern. Karen tried to interrupt. "Mr. Holloway, this is hardly—" "I'm not finished," I said, my tone firm but controlled. Years of legal consulting had taught me the power of a measured response. I watched as several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The next document was a surprise, a detailed environmental impact assessment I'd commissioned privately. It revealed critical flaws in the hotel's construction, drainage issues that could potentially harm local water sources, soil disruption that violated county environmental guidelines. Each finding was backed by professional geological reports. Martha's hand went up. "Could you explain the environmental concerns?" I walked her through the technical details, breaking down complex concepts into simple language. My goal wasn't to confuse, but to educate. The room listened, truly listened. Karen's face was a storm of emotions: anger, fear, desperation. She knew I wasn't just challenging the hotel's construction. I was exposing a pattern of systematic overreach. "You can't just take land," I said quietly. "This isn't just about a hotel. This is about respecting property rights, family legacy, and community trust." A young board member, Justin, I remembered his name from previous meetings, leaned forward. "We have some questions about the documentation." I smiled. Questions meant they were listening. Questions meant they understood the gravity of what I was presenting. For the next hour, I methodically dismantled the HOA's case. Each document, each photograph, each legal reference built a stronger picture. I wasn't just defending my land, I was defending a principle. As the meeting progressed, I noticed a shift. Board members who had initially looked dismissive now appeared concerned. Martha was taking notes. Justin was studying the environmental reports with genuine interest. Karen remained silent, her earlier confidence crumbling with each passing minute. When I finished, the room was electric with possibility. I hadn't won yet, but I'd planted seeds of doubt, seeds that would grow into serious questions about the HOA's actions. As people began to file out, Martha approached me. "Those environmental reports are serious," she whispered. "I don't think the board fully understood what was happening." I nodded, collecting my documents. The real battle was just beginning. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. My truck sat quietly, a reminder of the farm waiting for me. But something had changed. This wasn't just about land anymore. This was about justice. Karen watched me from across the parking lot, her eyes burning with a mix of hatred and fear. She knew I wasn't going to back down. "Not now. Not ever, old mister." Henderson from the neighboring farm knocked on our door just after breakfast. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he pushed an old manila envelope across our kitchen counter. "You'll want to see this," he whispered, his voice carrying the weight of decades-old secrets. Inside the envelope, a collection of faded photographs and handwritten notes told a story I never expected. Karen Reynolds wasn't just targeting my farm. She had a history of land grabs that stretched back years. The documents showed a pattern: manipulative tactics, backdoor deals, and a systematic approach to acquiring community land under the guise of neighborhood improvement. I noticed Sarah's hand on my shoulder. her touch grounding me. "What are you thinking?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. "These documents," I explained, spreading them out carefully. "They're more than just old papers. They're a roadmap to Karen's entire strategy." Mr. Henderson settled into a chair, his eyes distant. "She's been doing this for years," he said softly. "Nobody ever had the courage to stand up to her before." The first photograph caught my attention. An aerial view of Willowbrook from what looked like the late 1990s. Red lines had been carefully drawn on the map, marking property boundaries, but something was off. The lines didn't match the official county records I'd been studying. I remember when she first became HOA president. Mr. Henderson continued, "Promised to make our community better. But better for who?" Sarah began making copies of the documents, her movements precise and careful. Each page was a potential piece of evidence. Each photograph a potential weapon in our legal arsenal. A young woman walking past our window caught my eye. I recognized her from the HOA meetings. She hesitated, glanced nervously at our house, then quickly walked away. "Who was that?" I asked Sarah, but she had already noticed the woman's unusual behavior. Mr. Henderson leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Some folks in the community have been talking. Not everyone supports Karen's plans, but people are scared. She has a way of making life difficult for those who speak out." I carefully mapped out the connections. Each document told a story of calculated manipulation. Property rezoning, subtle boundary changes, mysterious permit approvals. Karen had been playing a long game, and my farm was just her latest target. "We need to be careful," I told Sarah. "These documents are powerful, but we can't rush. One wrong move, and she'll find a way to discredit everything." The phone rang. An unknown number. Sarah answered, her voice neutral. The conversation was brief, cryptic. When she hung up, her expression had changed. "Someone wants to meet you," she said. "Someone who knows more about Karen's past projects." Mr. Henderson's eyes twinkled. "Seems like the truth has a way of finding its way out," he muttered. I organized the documents, each one carefully placed in a clear plastic sleeve. Years of meticulous record-keeping were about to pay off. Karen thought she could simply take what she wanted, but she had no idea what was coming. Outside, a car slowly drove past our house. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of a familiar face, the same woman from earlier. She was watching, waiting, but for what? Sarah squeezed my hand. "We're in this together," she said. The documents before me were more than just paper. They were proof of a systematic approach to land theft. Proof that Karen Reynolds believed she was above the law. And, most importantly, proof that we were going to fight back. Mr. Henderson stood to leave, but not before sharing one last piece of wisdom. "Sometimes," he said, "the quietest people have the loudest stories." As he walked out, a single document slipped from his jacket, another piece of the puzzle waiting to be discovered. The next day, I organized the pile of papers. Old maps and property records created a maze of information that would become my weapon. Marcus Thompson, the lawyer I'd hired, sat across from me, his reading glasses perched carefully on his nose. "These property lines are more complicated than I first thought," Marcus muttered, tracing his finger along an old surveyor's map. His voice carried a mix of excitement and concentration that made me feel hopeful. I remembered how Karen had always looked down on our family at community meetings. She'd make snide comments about outdated farming methods and inefficient land use. Her perfectly pressed suits and manicured nails stood in sharp contrast to my weathered work boots and calloused hands. But today, those hands would become instruments of justice. Sarah brought us coffee, her hand briefly squeezing my shoulder. She knew what this meant to our family. This wasn't just about a piece of land. It was about our history, our legacy. Marcus pulled out a series of old county records. "Look at this," he said, spreading 3 different maps from different decades. "There's something strange about how the property boundaries have been recorded over the years." I leaned in, watching as he carefully aligned the maps. Each one told a different story, but together they revealed something unexpected. Small discrepancies began to emerge, tiny shifts in property lines that most people would have overlooked. The HOA didn't do their homework, Marcus whispered, a smile creeping across his face. They assumed everything was straightforward, but nothing in legal land disputes is ever simple. We spent hours combing through documents, old property tax records, inheritance papers, even decades-old correspondence between my grandfather and previous county officials. Each document was a piece of a complex puzzle. A notification pinged on Marcus's phone. He checked it carefully, then looked up with a glint in his eye. The local historical society just responded to my inquiry. They've got some interesting documents about land use in this area dating back to the 1940s. I thought about Karen, how she'd always acted like she owned everything. Her perfect lawn, her immaculate HOA newsletter, the way she'd walk around the neighborhood like a queen inspecting her kingdom. But kingdoms can fall, and this one would crumble under the weight of its own arrogance. We need to be careful, Marcus cautioned. If we reveal too much too soon, they might find a way to cover their tracks. I nodded, understanding the delicate dance we were performing. This wasn't just about winning. It was about exposing the truth. Sarah brought in a box from the attic. I found these in my grandmother's things, she said, placing it on the table. Inside were more old documents, property surveys, land transfer records, things most people would have thrown away years ago. Marcus's eyes widened as he carefully examined each piece of paper. These could be game changers, he muttered. The afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across our kitchen. Each document was a potential weapon, each map a potential battlefield. Karen thought she could simply take our land, build her hotel, destroy our family's legacy. But she had no idea what was coming. A phone rang in the distance. Marcus checked the caller ID and smiled. The county record office. He said they found something interesting in the archives. I looked out the window at the land Karen had tried to steal. The fields where my family had worked for generations now held a secret, a legal defense more powerful than any concrete hotel could ever be. They underestimated us, I said quietly, and that's going to be their biggest mistake. Marcus packed up his briefcase, carefully placing the documents in a secure folder. We're not just fighting for land, he said. We're fighting for justice. As he left, the evening settled over the farm. The hotel loomed in the distance, a monument to Karen's greed, but monuments can fall, and this one would crumble soon enough. I knew our fight was just beginning. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't felt since discovering the hotel. Hope. The phone rang, an unknown number. Something told me this call would change everything. The dusty attic had always been my sanctuary of memories, but today it felt different. Sunlight streamed through the small round window, catching particles of dust that danced like tiny storytellers. Sarah's hands were careful as she lifted an old wooden box I'd never seen before, its edges worn, brass hinges slightly tarnished. I found this behind your grandfather's filing cabinet, she said, her voice a mix of excitement and caution. There's something special about this box. I watched as she carefully lifted the lid. Inside, layers of carefully preserved documents created a mosaic of family history. Old property deeds, faded photographs, and what looked like decades of correspondence created a puzzle waiting to be solved. My grandfather had always been more than just a farmer. The first document we pulled out was a detailed property map. But this wasn't just any map. Intricate annotations in his precise handwriting covered every margin with notes that seemed to connect our land to something much larger than a simple farm. Look at this, I whispered, tracing a red line that zigzagged across the map's edge. It connected our property to several neighboring plots in a way that suggested a complex legal network. Tiny symbols, almost like a code, marked specific locations. Sarah leaned closer. These look like surveyor marks, but they're different, more intentional. As we continued exploring, a pattern emerged. My grandfather had meticulously documented every single interaction with the local government, every land survey, every property transaction. It was like he had been preparing for a fight that hadn't happened yet. One document caught my eye. A yellowed letter from 1973 addressed to the county land registry. The letter showed my grandfather's name, but the content was unlike anything I'd expected. It referenced an old land trust, a legal mechanism so complex that most modern lawyers would struggle to understand it. "This isn't just a property deed," I muttered. "This is a legal shield." Sarah pulled out another document, a hand-drawn family tree that extended far beyond our immediate relatives. Names I'd never heard before were carefully connected with dates and locations that seemed to create an intricate web of land ownership. The most intriguing piece was a sealed envelope at the bottom of the box. No address, just a wax seal with our family's initial pressed into the deep red wax. My hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal, careful not to damage the aged paper. Inside, the letter was written in my grandfather's unmistakable script. Each word deliberate, calculated. He spoke of a legal protection he'd put in place, a generations-old trust that would activate under specific circumstances. Circumstances that sounded remarkably similar to our current conflict with the HOA. "He knew," I said softly. Somehow, he knew something like this might happen. The letter revealed more than just legal protection. It hinted at a larger story, something about land rights, community development, and a long-standing dispute that predated the HOA's existence. Each paragraph was carefully worded, revealing just enough to spark curiosity without giving away everything. Sarah noticed my expression changing. "What are you thinking?" I took a deep breath. These documents aren't just about protecting our land. They're about exposing something much bigger. A series of photographs fell from between the papers, aerial shots of the land taken decades apart. They showed subtle changes, boundary shifts that would be invisible to anyone who wasn't looking carefully. My grandfather had been documenting something, leaving a trail of evidence that could blow the HOA's current actions wide open. One photograph showed Karen's family property decades ago, and something about the boundaries looked wrong. Not quite illegal, but definitely suspicious. "We need Marcus to look at these," I said, gathering the documents carefully. "But we can't let Karen know we found them." "Not yet." As if on cue, my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Some secrets are better left buried. The game had just changed. The box seemed to whisper stories of resistance, of carefully planned legal maneuvers that had been waiting decades to be unleashed. My grandfather wasn't just a farmer. He was a strategist who had anticipated a fight like this long before it ever happened. Sarah squeezed my hand. "What's our next move?" I looked at the documents, a calm determination settling over me. "We prepare." The next day, Sarah watched me, her eyes a mix of worry and determination. Our local newspaper, the Willowbrook Herald, had been hinting at a big story, and I knew today was the day everything would change. I'd spent weeks preparing, collecting every piece of evidence like a detective solving a complex puzzle. Old property maps, historical records, and communication logs were my weapons. Each document told a story of how the HOA, led by Karen Reynolds, had systematically tried to steal our family land. The phone rang. It was Jack Miller from the Willowbrook Herald. "We're ready to run the story," he said, his voice crackling with excitement. "But we need to be careful. Karen's not going to take this lightly." I understood the risk. Small towns like ours were complicated. People knew each other, had history, and Karen had been a powerful figure for years. She'd bullied her way through community meetings, pushed around local business owners, and always got what she wanted. Until now, Sarah made coffee, her hands steady, but her eyes watching me closely. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. It wasn't a question of doubt, but of support. She knew how much this land meant to our family. The first call came just minutes after the newspaper hit the stands. Karen's voice was sharp, cutting through the phone like a knife. "You think you can embarrass me?" she hissed. "I've been running this community for decades." But I remained calm. "I'm not trying to embarrass anyone," I replied. "I'm simply protecting what's rightfully ours." Local coffee shops became battlegrounds of conversation. People who had been too scared to speak up before now shared their own stories. Mr. Rodriguez, who owned the small convenience store, approached me at the gas station. "She tried the same thing with my property 10 years ago," he whispered. But I didn't have the courage to fight back. The local TV station picked up the story by afternoon. A young reporter named Emily Rodriguez stood outside our farm. Holding a microphone, "A local family is challenging the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association," she reported, alleging illegal land seizure and abuse of power. Karen's response was predictable. She called an emergency HOA meeting, inviting local media. I knew the strategy. She wanted to control the narrative, paint me as a troublemaker. But this time, I was prepared. Marcus, our lawyer, arrived with a thick folder. "They're going to try to discredit you," he warned. "Be ready for anything." The community center was packed. People who had always nodded politely to Karen now looked at her differently. The power dynamic was shifting, and she could feel it. "This is nothing more than a frivolous attack," Karen proclaimed, her voice echoing through the room. "This family is trying to disrupt our community's progress." But for every accusation she made, I had documentation. Property surveys from 1946, tax records, maintenance logs. Each piece of evidence was a shield against her attacks. Sarah squeezed my hand. Our teenage daughter, Emma, live-streamed parts of the meeting on social media. The community was watching, and they were learning the truth. A local real estate agent approached during a break. "I've worked with the HOA for years," he said quietly. "I always thought something seemed off, but I never had proof." By evening, the story had spread beyond Willowbrook. Regional news outlets were calling. Property rights groups expressed interest. What had started as a local dispute was becoming something much larger. Karen tried one last intimidation tactic. A legal notice arrived, threatening a countersuit. But it was weak, filled with bluster and empty threats. We both knew it. As the sunset cast a golden glow over our farm, I realized this was about more than just land. This was about standing up to bullies, about protecting family legacy, about showing that one person, armed with truth and determination, could make a difference. The phone rang again. This time, it was an investigative reporter from a statewide news network. "We want to do a full feature," she said. "Would you be willing to tell your story?" I looked at Sarah. She nodded, a small smile forming. "Yes," I replied. "We're ready." Little did we know, this was just the beginning of a fight that would turn this community around for the better. My fingers traced the faded lines of the property map spread across Marcus's conference table. Yellowed paper held more power than anyone realized. Each crease, each tiny notation whispered secrets about land rights older than most buildings in our county. "Look here," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. His pointer moved across a section I'd overlooked a dozen times before. A tiny symbol, no larger than a pencil dot, caught my eye. It wasn't just a mark. It was a lifeline. Wetlands. One single, almost invisible indicator that changed everything. The hotel Karen and the HOA had so brazenly constructed sat directly on a protected ecological zone. No permits in the world could save them now. Environmental regulations were like concrete walls, unbreakable, unforgiving. I remembered the countless weekends I'd spent walking this land with my grandfather. He'd point out subtle changes in soil, the delicate ecosystem that most people would never notice. "Land tells stories," he'd say. "You just have to listen carefully." Now, those stories were about to speak volumes in a courtroom. Marcus pulled out a stack of documents, satellite images, Geological surveys, water table reports. Each page was a weapon in our arsenal. The HOA thought they could steamroll over a family farm, but they'd made a fatal mistake. They didn't do their homework. "They'll try to fight this," Marcus warned, his eyes meeting mine. A look of professional determination mixed with personal investment. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was fighting for more than just a case. Sarah called during our meeting, her voice carrying a mix of excitement and caution. "The local environmental group wants to talk. They've been tracking potential wetland violations in the area." Another unexpected ally emerging from the woodwork. Karen's previous tactics flashed through my mind. Aggressive meetings, manipulated paperwork, bullying tactics that worked until they didn't. She treated community rules like personal suggestions, believing her position gave her unlimited power. But power has limits, and those limits were about to come crashing down. The environmental regulations were clear. Wetlands weren't just some lines on a map. They were living, breathing ecosystems protected by state and federal laws that didn't care about HOA presidents or their ambitious hotel projects. Marcus began explaining the potential violations, each word a nail in the HOA's coffin. Fines that could run into hundreds of thousands of dollars, mandatory restoration costs, potential criminal charges for knowingly violating environmental protection laws. I pulled out my phone, showing Marcus the photos I'd taken over the years, subtle changes in the landscape, water patterns, plant life that indicated a delicate ecological balance, documentation that would make our case bulletproof. "They didn't just build a hotel," I said quietly. "They destroyed an ecosystem." A courier arrived mid-meeting. Another batch of documents, this time from the county's Geological Survey Department. Each page felt like another layer of armor in our legal defense. Marcus made a call to an environmental law specialist. Confirmation after confirmation built our case. The hotel wasn't just an illegal structure. It was an environmental violation waiting to be exposed. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Check your email. You'll want to see this." Cryptic, intriguing. The email contained aerial photographs showing the exact extent of the wetland area. Someone inside the system wanted to help. Anonymous tips weren't just Hollywood movie tricks. Sometimes they were real lifelines. Sarah joined us, bringing coffee and a stack of community petition signatures. Neighbors who'd been silent were now finding their voices. The HOA's power was crumbling, one signature at a time. "They thought no one was watching," Marcus said, spreading the documents across the table. "But everyone was watching. They just needed someone to connect the dots." I thought about my grandfather, about generations of our family who'd respected this land, who understood that ownership wasn't about conquering. It was about listening, about understanding the delicate balance between human ambition and natural preservation. Karen had seen the land as an opportunity. We saw it as a responsibility. The pieces were falling into place, not with dramatic explosions, but with careful, methodical precision. Each document, each photograph, each scientific report was another brick removed from the HOA's fortress of arrogance. We weren't just fighting a legal battle. We were telling a story about community, about respect, about understanding that some things are more important than concrete and profit margins. The turning point wasn't just coming. It had arrived. My hands trembled as I entered the courtroom that morning. Months of preparation had led to this moment. A David versus Goliath battle that would decide the fate of my family's farm. The wooden benches creaked with tension, packed with local farmers, community members, and curious onlookers. Karen sat 2 rows ahead, her perfectly pressed blazer a shield against the mounting evidence. She'd always been the type to believe rules were for everyone else except her. I watched her adjust her designer glasses, a nervous tic she couldn't quite hide. Marcus, my lawyer, leaned over and whispered, "Stay calm. We've got this." His confidence was a lifeline I desperately needed. Years of my family's history hung in the balance, generations of hard work, sweat, And dreams compressed into this single moment, the judge entered, her stern gaze sweeping across the courtroom. Judge Elizabeth Hartman was known for her no-nonsense approach. She'd seen countless land disputes, but something about our case felt different. I could see it in the way she studied the mountain of documents Marcus had meticulously prepared. The court will now hear closing arguments in the matter of Holloway versus Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, the bailiff announced, his voice echoing through the hushed room. Marcus stood first, his navy suit crisp and professional. Your Honor, what we have here is more than a simple land dispute. This is about a systematic abuse of power, a deliberate attempt to steal a family's legacy through bureaucratic manipulation. He began laying out the evidence. Property maps dating back to my grandfather's time, preservation documents, specific clauses in the original community covenant that the HOA had conveniently ignored. Each document was a puzzle piece that revealed a larger picture of corruption. Karen's lawyer attempted to interrupt, but Judge Hartman silenced him with a sharp look. I noticed Karen's fingers drumming nervously against her leather portfolio. For the first time, I saw a crack in her usually impenetrable facade. Miss Reynolds, the judge addressed Karen directly. Can you explain why your organization proceeded with hotel construction without a complete environmental impact study? Karen's response was quick, rehearsed. We followed all standard procedures. The property was technically... Marcus interrupted. Your Honor, we have evidence that directly contradicts that statement. He presented a series of emails, communications between Karen and local officials that suggested backdoor dealings. Each message painted a picture of deliberate circumvention of proper protocols. I remembered the night Sarah and I had spent reviewing these documents, the late-night research, the careful cross-referencing, the moments of frustration and hope. Our entire life had become this legal battle. A local environmentalist was called to testify. Her report revealed critical ecosystem disruptions caused by the hasty hotel construction, rare plant species, potential water table contamination. Each point was another nail in the HOA's coffin. Karen's composure began to crack. I could see sweat forming on her forehead, her perfectly maintained appearance showing signs of strain. The community members who once feared her now watched with a mix of curiosity and growing respect for our persistence. The most powerful moment came unexpectedly. An HOA board member, visibly uncomfortable, approached the witness stand. His testimony revealed internal disagreements, suggesting Karen had acted without full board approval. I couldn't stay silent anymore, he said, his voice shaking. What she did wasn't right. Marcus's strategy was becoming clear. This wasn't just about winning a legal battle. It was about exposing a pattern of systematic overreach. Hours passed, witnesses testified, documents were examined. The courtroom became a theater of truth, with each piece of evidence peeling back layers of deception. As the day wore on, I watched Karen, once confident, now uncertain. The woman who had always believed she could bulldoze her way through any obstacle was facing her greatest challenge. Judge Hartman took her time. She reviewed documents, asked pointed questions, and listened carefully to every testimony. Her demeanor was unreadable, a judicial poker face that revealed nothing. The final moments approached. The collective breath of the courtroom seemed to hold itself. Waiting, a single document remained. Marcus approached the bench, his steps measured and deliberate. Your Honor, he began. This final piece of evidence will demonstrate the full extent of the HOA's misconduct. Karen's lawyer stood, objecting, but everyone knew this was the moment of truth. My hands trembled as I walked across the farm, not from fear, but from the weight of victory. Every step felt like a conversation with my grandfather, whose careful planning had protected our land through generations. Sarah joined me, her eyes scanning the landscape that was slowly healing. The worn-out wheat fields were already showing signs of new growth. Where the illegal hotel once stood, only foundation marks remained, a stark reminder of our battle. Marcus, our lawyer, had done more than win a case. He'd exposed a network of corrupt local officials who thought they could steamroll family-owned properties. Karen's network was crumbling. 3 city council members had already resigned, and investigations were spreading like wildfire. They never expected a farmer to fight back, I muttered. Picking up a handful of soil, it felt different now. Not just dirt, but a symbol of resilience. Our community had transformed. Neighbors who once feared the HOA now stood tall, sharing stories of similar struggles. Local news ran feature after feature about our fight, inspiring others to challenge unfair land grabs. But this wasn't just about winning, it was about protecting a legacy. My grandfather's meticulous property records, kept in those old leather-bound journals, had become our secret weapon. Each carefully documented boundary, each handwritten note about land use. They were more powerful than any modern legal document. Karen wasn't finished, though. Her last look in the courtroom told me this was just the beginning. She appealed, hinting at mysterious connections that could potentially reopen our case. But we were prepared. Every potential attack had a counter-strategy. The farm wasn't just land anymore. It was a message that said small landowners could stand up to powerful organizations, that careful documentation and community support could overcome corruption. As sunset painted the sky, Sarah squeezed my hand. "We did it," she whispered. But we both knew the real work was just starting. In the distance, a hawk circled our land, a silent guardian watching over our hard-won peace.